Good morning. So today is the 13th day of Tevis and the 6th of January. And we're continuing on, hopefully finishing the analysis of kabbalat, of taking on the Yoke of Heaven. And we said yesterday that it has three parts to it: submission, separation, and sweetening, like in many things. We explained what that was. And we finished the section where the Rebbe explains the submission. And we said the submission in kabbalat, and here the Rebbe is applying it to how you treat your fellow. So he says the first thing is that our connection is higher than our vessels, meaning that even if we don't like someone and so on, submission says that first of all God commanded me to reach this level of caring about someone else and taking care of someone else. This is relevant not just on the street; it's relevant at home also, right? At home it's the same thing. When you decide to get married, when you have children, a lot of times parents don't see eye to eye with their children when they grow up. They turn out to be very different than the parents. And yet, there's a natural tendency for parents to take care of their children. So that's like a higher calling, giving them that push that they should continue to take care of them. But sometimes even that doesn't work. And so what remains is what we call the submission to God's will. That Hashem wants us to be together. He brought us together. And so there is an element of taking upon ourselves this requirement, this obligation to take care, to dedicate ourselves to other people without any reason here. Now in chapter 10, he continues on with now two aspects, separation and sweetening, that are related to the tribe of Asher. And he says like this, במחנה דן עצמו, page 94. היה שבט אשר האמצעי לא בקצוות כי אמצעי משובח הפנימיות שברגל. כשם שמחנה דן באופן כללי השפיע גם על כל בני ישראל, כך גם שבט אשר במיוחד השפיע על כל בני ישראל, כאמור לגבי אשר ירצו יחב, ורז"ל מפרשים שסיפק מזון נשאר בני ישראל בשנת השמיטה. Okay, so the tribe of Asher, it's in the middle of the encampment of Dan. And the Rebbe says this is not just a middle in the sense of geographically they're in the middle. It's not just situating them in terms of space. It's also saying that they're in the middle in the sense of that they're acceptable by everyone. They're like the person who's average is the wrong word, but a person who is liked by everyone equally. And it says that why were they so liked? Because they provided food for the rest of the Jewish people on the sabbatical year. The sabbatical year, when the land is not tilled, it's not sowed, and only the residue from last year continues to grow, what we call sweetening. We talked a lot about that, and actually in last week's Torah or there was a mimer about that and why that's even higher in a certain respect than what you sow, because these are things that come down from heaven by themselves, and therefore it's produce that grows by itself, meaning it's not the product of human work. So therefore these things have a higher source, and in that sense they represent something higher. But in any case, they provided food, meaning they had a lot of that type of sfichin. And the reason they had so much sfichin, they had so many residue growth in their fields during the sabbatical year, was because of their blessings. And their blessing, like we saw, was that they have a tremendous amount of oil, a tremendous amount of trees, olive trees, probably other trees as well. And so they could provide for everyone during the sabbatical year. But the Rebbe asks like this: what's the connection still between Asher and the sabbatical year? And why was this blessing, he says, the blessing was for all the tribes that on the sabbatical year they would give a lot of residue growth. So why was this particularly, why do the sages particularly mention the tribe of Asher? עניינה של השמיטה מוסבר בכתוב, הצורך בשביתת הארץ בכל המלאכות של חרישה וחריש וקציר תשבות, המלאכות הקשורות במזון האדם שופטו, לגבי זה נאמר, וכי תאמרו מה נאכל ובעד תשובה וציוויתי את ברכתי. לכאורה בלתי מובן, לשם מה ייתור הלשון וכי תאמרו, יתר על כן, לשם מה צריכה התורה לעורר קושייה, מאחר שישנה שאלה בתורה, הכרחי לומר שיש מקום לקושייה גם בקדושה. The Rebbe says there's an incredible thing about the sabbatical year that doesn't appear in other places. It starts off with a question. It's almost like the Haggadah of Pesach. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh. It's like it's trying to teach you something. It's trying to educate you. Or, in this sense, it's opening your mouth up. At ptachlo. You're opening up the mouth of the person in order that they begin to question. And the Torah does this about the sabbatical year commandment, and it doesn't do it in other places. And it says, should you say, or should you ask, really, what will we eat on the 7th year, on the 8th year? Then you should know that I will command my blessing to you for these years. So it's an amazing thing. Why does the Torah do that? Why does it open up a question when it comes to this? So Asher, this tribe, is related specifically in this sense to the Shemitah because it has something to do with questioning. Now, we have to make it short because we don't have that much time. One of the basic ingredients that transforms us as individuals is our ability to question. If you can't question, if you don't have any questions, you can't change. Change occurs when you have questions. It's very interesting that most people don't question their life until they begin to suffer. And when they begin to suffer, or they have problems, then they begin to question. Like we see by Rivka. When she had finally a pregnancy, you don't see her questioning because she has a pregnancy. You see her questioning when they begin to fight inside. And she begins to be ill by it. The two children, she doesn't know she has twins and they're fighting, or maybe she does know she has twins, but why are they fighting? Without questions, you don't change. So, a very simple thing. We talk a lot about all these different ideas and so on. If a person doesn't stop in the middle of the day and say, like for instance, we talked about this a few days ago, the pleasure principle, the rectified pleasure principle. What am I doing right now? Am I taking care of my own needs, my pleasure? Am I gratifying myself? Or am I trying to gratify God? If you don't ask that 10 times a day, you don't change. The questions are a vehicle for change. The questions are a vehicle for forming identity. And there's this statement in the Talmud that says, Mi kaima l'she'ela, that the word mi, who, was given for a question. It's like a very strange thing. Of course, who is a question? Well, what are you saying? The way it's understood is that mi is the question that is related, or even the word that's related to understanding, to bina. Particularly to idbonenut. Idbonenut means to meditate, to think, to contemplate. The Jewish way of contemplation is that you ask questions. You have to ask questions. So what it's saying is, if you want to come to meditation, if you want to come to an understanding of something deeply, you have to have she'elot. You have to have questions. If you don't have any questions, nothing's going to change. It's like it went in from here and it's going to go out from there, and that's it. And you go to a shir, and that's what happens. And even you learn things. So one of the interesting things I learned when I was much, much younger, in my 20s, I was learning with a really incredible genius in halacha. And we were going over, at the time it was Choshen Mishpat. And every seif we finished in the Choshen Mishpat, after we'd gone over the Beis Yosef, and the Drisha, and the Prisha, and then in the Shulchan Aruch, all the Nosei Kelim, the Cham, and the Sma, everything we did, and the Tivot, and the Pitchei Tshuva. Then he would say, okay, what is the question? It's like Jeopardy. What is the question around which you can bring all the opinions and put them together as answers to this particular question? So this was always like the intense meditation and thought after learning something. Sometimes it would take like a few hours to learn the Seif, to learn one passage. So then we'd have to think of what was the question that everything revolved around. Right? Sometimes it wasn't just one, sometimes it was two or three, and you couldn't really pinpoint one. But you have to bring things down to that. You have to bring them to mi kaima l'sheila. That in order to really have deep understanding, to open mi is equal to 50, it's the 50 gates of understanding. To open up these gates of understanding, you have to think about what is the question hiding behind here. So it's very popular now to ask, what's bothering Rashi? Rashi just says what he says. So what was his question? Okay. Where did they learn this from? To a great deal, they learned it from the Parshanim, the different commentaries on Rashi, because they sort of asked that question. What's the question Rashi is asking? Perush HaDvarim. So here we have this new thing that there are questions in holiness. The Rebbe is saying you can't understand Torah without being in wonder, asking questions. And holiness requires that. It's very interesting that holiness requires that, because holiness is in Chokhmah, it's in wisdom. Usually we think of holiness really as something that's just a state, it's a permanent state, there's no questions there. But now he says, no, Chokhmah and Bina go together. If you want to reach Chokhmah, if you want to reach Kedusha, holiness, you also have to have understanding, and understanding is predicated on the questions that you ask. But here we're taking it not just in that sense, we're taking it in the sense that the identity of the person is formed through the questions that he asks about himself, about his life. And he shouldn't wait until he's suffering. He should do this every single day. Take time to ask these questions, basic questions you can ask. There's 4 basic questions you can ask, but not now. פירוש הדברים שהחידוש שבשמיטה אינו בכך שהדברים מסתדרים בצורה שהם מלכתחילה מקום לקושייה, אלא שמתעוררת קושייה, ודווקא קושייה חזקה, ועם זאת שובת האדם מן המלאכות כפי שציווה הקדוש ברוך הוא. So the usher has this sgula, this trait, that they are able to tolerate the questions. And they're able to take the questions and answer them. They're not afraid of the questions. And in fact, the whole questioning process is part of the holiness. This is the opposite of what people think about Torah. The Torah is some kind of, how should I say, some decree, some dogma that came down from the heavens. No, he says, if you want to understand Torah, you have to have questions. מצוות השמיטה קשורה במקום ודברים שלגביהם יש מקום לקושייה. שמיטה, the sabbatical year, is related to things that have difficult questions about them. ובכל זאת אין הדבר משפיע על בני ישראל, לפיכך וציוויתי את בריחתי. And yet they answer it properly, and that's where the blessing comes from. The blessing depends on being able to ask the question and not lose faith. And not understand that the questioning process is part of the faith, part of the holiness. אותו וציוויתי את ברכתי אינו בצורה כזו שלא יהיה צורך בתבואות הארץ, כשהיה לגבי משה שלחם לא אכל ומים לא שתה. So Hashem is going to give His blessing, not that you're not going to need to eat on the 7th year, on the 8th year. Rather, it's not going to be like Moses who went up to the heavens and didn't eat and didn't drink. It's not also that the food will remain in your stomach for a whole year, like it happened by Eliyahu. And it's not going to be like the manna, the man, that you had all the tastes, and there was no excrement, nothing came out of it. It was entirely soaked up by the body. But rather, simple, regular bread that we know, with all the problems that regular bread has. This is not going to happen in some miraculous place, it's going to happen in the fields of the land of Israel. למרות שהדבר קשור כל כך בגשמיות ואף בחומריות, עד שמתעוררת הקושייה וכי תאמרו מה נאכל, בקיים אדם בכל זאת את המצווה בקבלת עול, לפיכך וציוויתי את ברכתי במזון הגשמי למטה למטה. So Asher is related to accepting the yoke of heaven, not only despite questions, but because of questions. The questions themselves bring the person to a higher understanding of the necessity to take on obligations. כך יובן דבר שאף על העובדה שנאמר בשמיטה ושבתה הארץ שבת להשם, כשנאמר בשבת, מהווים בכל זאת ימי השנה ימי חול פשוטים, לא כבשבת האסורה במלאכה, אף לא כביום טוב. And this is even stressed in the fact that it lasts a whole year. If it was like a sabbatical, like Shabbat, like the Sabbath once a week, and that day is holy, it's consecrated. So, okay, that would be on a different level. But here we're saying on the regular level of being a human being, there is going to be this blessing coming down and blessing the material wealth that you have, and not going into some kind of miraculous state. So therefore, this caused the tribe of Asher, which was blessed by this, to reveal something more internal. This is chapter 13. Let's see if we can skip to the end. What they received, what they received was a revelation of the obligation as it comes from above. This is separation, because we always say separation is seeing the holiness of an issue. That's how you separate the holy from the non-holy. We don't focus on what's wrong. We focus on what's good. And if we focus on what's good, in this case, you focus on the divinity of something. So in an obligation and taking on the yoke of heaven, there's a divine aspect to it. That was especially revealed by the tribe of Asher. It wasn't revealed by other tribes because they had a special relationship to the sabbatical year. What he's saying is, again, that in terms of identity, there's no problem with questions, and they're required, and they lead to a revelation from above. Sometimes you have to stand, really, literally what the Torah means, mi kaima l'she'ela, it means literally, the me stands in a question. Who stands in a question? The person who's able to ask a question needs to be able to stand in the question. And the standing in the question and saying, nonetheless, I'm still doing what I'm required to, leads to a revelation from above. What's that revelation from above? So it's the feeling that I identify with taking on the yoke of heaven. It's not just something that, like in the submission, I just had to bend over backwards and say, okay, this is what I'm doing. I identify with it. And so the same thing happens in our relationship with other people, that it's not just bending over. After a while, if you're willing to stand in that place, even with the difficulties, even with the questions, something awakens in you from above. Your higher identity comes to play, comes to the foreground. And when that higher identity appears, then you identify with this task. It's no longer just bending over backwards to do what God says. It becomes that this is who I am. The biggest question that we've had in the last century is the Holocaust. The biggest question. The people who stood and asked the question and didn't necessarily get an answer why. They don't know why. But something appeared from above. What appeared from above, it's the way that we like to say this, is that we are existentially connected to the Torah and the mitzvos. Even when there is no reward, as it were, even when it's the opposite. The Holocaust only served to strengthen the identification, not the blind following. That's something entirely different. There were people during the Holocaust, they had this ability to bend over and continue to follow everything they could. But the people afterwards are faced with questions. And those questions, they lead to a higher identification, a higher sense of identity with the Torah and mitzvah. Same thing. Okay, so we'll end here, and God willing, we'll finish it, I guess, on Sunday. Okay? Good Shabbos.
Well, a little bit of that question.